Okay. All right, y'all. Welcome to, I don't know, third, fourth now, physical education. I think it's number 4 technically. And this week's one comes from a discussion I had with my coaches this week, sort of came up organically about training and expectations and how many days should we train and what the benefit of sort of frequency is and how that aligns with our training goals, right? What we should expect from each option. And so a little funny story to start. Once when I was in college, I had one of those big obligatory college dude, big plastic jars of protein sitting on top of the fridge. And my roommate, Jake, who didn't love the gym, looked at it one day and was like, dude, if I drank all of that protein, I think it was like one of those 5-gallon jugs. So, the size of like a car tire. He said, if I drank all of those at once, if I drank all of it at once, if I put it all in like a giant blender and drank it all at once, would I just be totally jacked? And, it was funny. Obviously, that's not the case. And, consistency and frequency of training has something to do with how often we train. Consistency even of drinking a protein shake, right? You can't drink it all at once and expect the same benefit of if you, drank one each day or something like that. Similarly, if you're thinking about training, you can think about somebody who has like some weird schedule. They have like one day off a week and they do 5 hours of training and try to do basically like a full week's worth of work. Would that be, just as good? And I think just theoretically, you can tell the answer is no, that's not ideal. Right. So we were talking about frequency and progress and expectations. And one of the things is that often people think, I'm training consistently. And actually, if you look at it, they're training more like intermittently. And so we kind of played around over this week with developing some criteria so that we can realign expectations with reality, so that people stop kind of beating themselves up when things aren't going their way and to offer them a path forward when they're feeling stuck. We sort of divided this into 4 buckets, 4 kind of templates of training. Training 1 time a week, 2 times a week, 3 times a week, and 4 times or more each week, right? Now, each level works for something, but they work for different goals, okay? And, the social scientists would say that most of our frustration comes from when our goal and our frequency mismatch. For somebody who, wants to perform like an athlete, but is really acting like a tourist at the gym. And behavioral research shows that people can tend to systematically overestimate their weekly exercise and movement. Prince et al. In 2008, right? If I'm saying et al., we're talking about a research study. They put accelerometers on people to track daily physical activity. And they found that people overreported that activity somewhere in the neighborhood of 36 to 173%. compared to the accelerometer data. So obviously, it can be hard to really understand kind of what we're doing week in and week out. Anyway, into kind of our 4 buckets of training. So first up is 1 day a week. This is kind of the biggest corner case, right? We think about this as like the skill day. 1 day a week can improve something pretty specific, certainly not everything. This is great for focus work. We're working on Olympic lifting, gymnastic skills, maybe some running technique. But there isn't enough frequency to drive global adaptation, strength, conditioning, body composition. If that's the only day of practice a week, progress is going to be limited. So usually this works for people who are doing something in that session and then repeating what they worked on in other workouts, in other sessions during the week, right? We see this a lot with people who might come here for, like we said, Olympic weightlifting, and then they're doing Olympic weightlifting training during the week where they take those lessons they learned forward and try to apply them to a more kind of like consistent training block. Okay. Research on this backs it up. Rhea et al. In 2000 in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research found that 1 time a week training produced some strength gains, significantly less than 3 times a week, mainly because that 1 time a week work focused mainly on neuromuscular skill and not robust strength adaptation. Right? Neuromuscular gains are signifiers of practice. It means that your brain and your muscles are communicating better, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're building lasting development for your joints, for your tissues, stuff like that. DeFrancisco and Donahue et al. In 2007 found that older adults improved strength with 1 time a week training, but that it plateaued very quickly, probably at that point where their neurological development ended and their muscular development never got enough touch, never got enough frequency to really take off. So that's 1 day a week. 2 days a week training. We call this like feeling good, moving well. This is where people become functionally healthier, but not always necessarily stronger or faster in a demonstrable setting. So 2 days a week training is enough to improve joint function. It's enough to increase your energy in your day-to-day life, to reduce maybe some aches and pains, to maintain some strength if we've built that, to build maybe a foundation to start thinking about adding a 3rd day or something else. In 2 day a week training, breadth of movement is a lot more important here than a progression. We want to hinge and squat and push and pull and carry and rotate and get, some conditioning in. And really here, because we're not pushing deep change, right? We're not going into one movement and getting that a lot better. We can kind of make up for that with some breadth. There is not enough overlap with only 2 days a week to create big global strength and conditioning leaps. But the good side is that 2 times a week does make people feel part of a community. Scientifically, frequency drives identity. And we found that twice weekly is when people start saying, like, I go to the gym, I go to Lumos. Even small dose training can improve feelings of self-efficacy and emotional well-being. So research on these, Schoenfeld et al. In 2019, this is a meta-analysis. Training muscle groups twice a week led to better hypertrophy than 1 time a week, even when the volume was the same. So we can see this is way better than once a week, and that's a pattern that's going to continue. And Ryan and Deci, who sort of made up the self-determination theory, which states that consistency builds internal motivation, autonomy, and competence and relatedness, and that leads to adherence. Twice a week training is like the ground floor of creating some cadence. And, thinking about cadence, you can think about your training sessions almost like a kick drum, right? 1 day out of 7 is, some weird experimental jazz, something that my buddy Rio would listen to. 1 beat or 1 workout followed by 2 to 3 measures of silence or non-workout days, that's starting to sound like something. Now we're getting a little bit of flow. So that's twice a week. Now, 3 days a week, this is kind of where real training actually starts. And, I don't want to put real in too much of quotation marks. I don't want to sound like somebody saying the real America, but it kind of is what it is. Okay. With 3 weekly touches, the body finally gets enough overlap between days and movements to globally adapt. For coaches, this gives us the ability to program progression. It lets us start seeing linear strength progress. Conditioning benchmarks begin to improve. Energy systems get trained often enough that it really starts to add up and matter. And there's enough frequency to accumulate meaningful volume, the thing that's really going to drive adaptation. Now, from a social angle, people who are training 3 times a week begin to identify that as training, not just like, hey, I'm going to the gym. Right? Friction drops. There are fewer missed sessions. There's lower restart cost. And the fallback for if I'm training 3 times a week and I miss a session is I'm still training twice a week. And that's pretty okay. If I'm only training twice a week and I miss one and I train 1 day a week, we've already talked about how that is a pretty drastic shift. When we're training 3 times a week, the habit loop becomes self-reinforcing. So some of the research here, Gurgic et al. In 2018, another meta-analysis confirmed that strength gains rise as frequency increases 1 day to 2 day to 3 day to 4 days. Again, even when the volume over those sessions is equal, they found that the effect sizes increase progressively and that 3 times is a major breakaway point. Now, Frontiers in Physiology did a review in 2018 and showed that beginners improve most at 3 times a week because it balances stimulus with fatigue with recovery. Now, there's behavioral research on habit formation that Lally did in 2010 that showed that repetition increases automaticity. Right? That sort of autopilot feeling around 3 times a week was common among people they labeled as successful habit adopters. So that's 3 times a week. And then we get into 4 days a week and more than 4 days a week. And this is really where athletic performance lives. More days means more volume, means more adaptation. And this is where people who expect athletic outcomes need to live. Measurable, predictable, sport-specific progress becomes possible. Here we can manipulate volume and intensity and recovery and skill in a meaningful weekly structure. This is training more days of the week than not. We see things like improved VO2 max, faster strength gains, the real buildup and proficiency of metabolic conditioning. And this is really where you see sport performance start to take off. Whether that's fitness sports like CrossFit or high rocks or running, cycling, or field sports like, soccer, playing basketball, that's where you're really going to feel it. Now, people who train 4 times a week, those people become, in a social standpoint, community anchors, right? They show up during slumps because the habit is identity level. And consistency research shows that people stick to routines better when training is frequent enough to feel integrated into their daily life, right? It is just part of what they do. Now, Schoenfeld and Gurgic, same person who was doing the study before, this is 2022, they show that higher frequency allows that higher volume, and that's where we get the greatest hypertrophy and strength gains. The BMS Sports Science and Rehab Journal in a 2024 review showed that 4+ days a week significantly outperforms low frequency training, even when total volume rises. And then there's a lot of self-identity research, some of it done by Strachan and Broadley in 2009, and show that athletes who have high exercise identity have higher adherence, especially when they're doing 4+ sections a week. The big idea here is that we need to match the goal to the dose, right? Once a week, skill, technique, a specific fix for a problem that probably after a little bit of training, we're over and on to the next thing. Twice a week, that's enough to feel good, to move well, to start building longevity. 3 times a week is where we start making real strength and conditioning progress. And 4 times a week or more are when we really start seeing performance gains, measurable outcomes improving, and intentional training. Now, the social science angle. When expectations match is when we see contentment, satisfaction, and consistency and long-term success. And when there is an expectation mismatch, that's what usually leads to disappointment. Now, in my gym, we have members all over the board. We have people training 5 to 6 days a week with the goal of racing or playing a sport or just getting super duper fit, looking great naked, to people coming in twice a week, enjoying community, feeling better, and having more energy for their day-to-day tasks. There is no wrong dose. There's just the dose that matches the goal. And when those aren't aligned, that's when generally people start feeling frustrated. So I hope this was helpful for you. We are going to use this little rubric moving forward, basically as a way of talking to people as they are starting at the gym and trying to help them match what they're looking to get out of their time here with how many days a week they're planning to be here. It's something that me and my coaches are planning to talk with our current clients about to see, hey, is the amount of time you are spending here a match with what you are trying to get out of this? And it is also a way that we are going to sort of align and template and kind of give ourselves some benchmarks as we program and as we, develop programs for our clients. If you are at home, this is a good time to ask yourself, where on the spectrum do I fall? What am I trying to train for, right? I want you to give yourself an honest self-audit. How many sessions a week do you actually average right now? What result does that frequency of training realistically support? What would it look like for you to better align things? And if there is a mismatch and there is a change that you need to make, is that change worth it to you, balanced against your life overall? If you have that conversation with yourself, the worst thing that can happen is that you realize something is not, where you want it to be, and you can make the decision about whether you want to or don't want to make a change. But it will help you better understand sort of who you are and what you need to get where you want to go. So this is a relatively short one. This is going to pop up in some of the stuff we see around the gym. I'd love to hear your comments and your ideas or any thoughts you have about this. Remember, like and subscribe and do all those things. And please, get me in this conversation. We're still developing this. And after 15+ years of training, this to me has been something that this week has really kind of captivated my thinking. And so I hope it does the same for you. And I hope we can talk about it. I will see you next time. Bye.